the point was, these little things kept coming in my life that made me start questioning and wondering about things. And it wasn't until reading the Serious Mystery with Robert Temple with the Dogon and their
this is what you were talking about last night.
And their understanding of like details of the Sirius stars A, B, and C, and the Canis Major, and all the orbital tracks of everything, and how they said they were influenced by all these things. But they're like this remote tribe in the middle of Mali, Africa. How could they know any of that before telescopes were invented?
Can you explain them
Sure.
and that whole thing? Because that blew my mind.
Yeah,
last
I'll
night.
give that.
This was the one where you were talking about they put one elder in the cave and everything,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
This is wild.
I guess it's important because this is what was my spark. People talk about what is that spark that sends you off on a completely different path in life, where you start then questioning everything else. And I was primed for that moment, because when I read that book, it's one of those moments where you sit it down and you just sort of stare up and you're like, what the hell? Like, because then all of a sudden your brain has to reformat. It's a lot harder than people, I think, just think it is. When you're taught everything in your life about everything in a certain way, and your teachers and your parents, to change a paradigm of our entire history, who we are, influence potentially the stars, that's a big shift, because it shifts your whole brain into different thinking. And that shift came with the story of the Dogon. And what the story is, if those aren't familiar with it, it's one of those things that is impossible to truly refute. And I think that's why it's so powerful. The story is that there's a tribe in Mali, Africa, Western Africa, very remote region, that had never been visited by the outside world. And there was originally one, but eventually became two French anthropologists in the 1930s were fascinated by this tribe. They met them, but what they were so fascinated by was that the tribe had all these incredible stories of their heritage and their history that they wouldn't tell him. This is what I didn't mention to you last night. That's so fascinating, is that he wanted to know this incredible history because they had drawn in the sand like orbital tracks of stars and stuff, and things that they should not have known because the telescope hadn't been invented. They knew about Sirius, the star, Sirius A, but B and C. B hadn't even been discovered yet by radio telescope. Once B was discovered, they were like, wait, so the Dogon already knew about that before they even had telescopes. But they also say there's a star called Sirius C that we haven't even discovered yet. Okay, so the point was, they knew incredible amounts of information, not just about the Sirius star system, but about our Earth, about the energy of it, about the source God. So this French anthropologist is forced to stay with them for 10 years. Live with them for 10 years because they wouldn't tell him. They didn't trust him. So
they forced him to stay.
No,
there.
But if he wanted to know, he had to stay. So they didn't make him. They didn't say you can't leave.
Yes.
But he wanted to know. So in order for them to tell him, he had to stay with the culture to gain their trust for 10 years. The reason for that was that the Dogon had such profound information about their history that they felt that the only way to not have that message be polluted was they would have an elder of the community be decided, and then a secondary elder that could communicate with them, and they would isolate themselves in a cave, completely isolated from the outside world.
The elder, who was never allowed out. It's like a life sentence.
But he's the only one who knew the entire history. And they did that because they recognized, just like the game of phone when you're a kid, right? You're that game with a circle of kids, and you're like, hey, the elephant went to the store, and then by the time you get around, it's like something completely different.
Oh, that's not a children's game. That is a real life, like, we see that every fucking, just go on Twitter. Christ. One tweet changes to the other, next thing you know, it's like, well, how did this even start?
So this elder, they know that, and this elder is kept to preserve, and I only scratched the surface of what they knew. I encourage people to go read the Serious Mystery, the things they knew about our solar system and about Earth and about even the stars it's mind-boggling, right? So he stays there for 10 years. They tell him the whole thing, finally. He comes back and...
To be clear real fast, how many people told him? Because the full history is only known by the elder.
He eventually gained the trust of that elder.
In the cave?
Yes. That's why it took him 10 years.
So why did they this is what I don't understand, why did they let an outsider become the intermediary when they had spent all these years specifically saying there was only going to be the elder and then the person, I guess, who's going to take the torch eventually, who is the intermediary.
Because they realized that he was this genuine researcher scientist who wanted to document it right, like the right way. And it led to an entire book and bringing recognition to the Dogon for what they are and what they're doing. And it took 10 years because they wanted to trust that. I mean, that's a long time. That's not like a short time.
You're right. Yes.
And so eventually they did tell him their entire story. And he took it back and wrote all of it down and kind of blew up the academic world.
Now, and what year was that again?
This is like 1931 to 1940.
Okay. So what sources did they cite within their culture? Like, how did they?
Yeah,
was
it
it just, oh, this has been passed down to an elder in the cave over and over, so that's how we know it's the truth? Or did they say specifically like this elder was, generations ago was around for X, Y, or Z, and here's how we know it?
Right. So that's actually, they have a very specific point about how they say they got knowledge and where they. First of all, the history of the Dogon is unusual because they came from Africa. They actually were originally part of the ancient African Egyptian area, and they left because of religious persecution, and then ended up in Mali, which is sort of strange on its own because we're going to see other comparisons and connections through that part of Africa with parts of like the Olmec in Mexico, in Veracruz, which is very unusual, which shows that they likely made it. Anyway. What they state is that they learned everything from a great traveling being, a great sage that was known as Awanas in ancient Sumer. And they depicted it as like an aquatic being, which I think was purely symbolic. Because when you go to Sumer and you learn about the great sages like Adapa and the Apkallu, they use symbolism to describe them in a way of what their mentality, what their purpose, a lot of different aspects of them. And you find that there was an ancient Sumerian god who is the heart of their entire civilization known as Enki. And he's supposed to be the god of fresh water and the god of the oceans.
Can you go back for a minute for people who are
Sure.
unfamiliar right now? And I do want to say, for those who are listening today who are deep on ancient civilizations and know the history well, I apologize if we go back to do some stuff that may be basic for you, but there's a lot of people listening.
Yeah.
You and I talked about this before. There's a lot of people listening who are unfamiliar with some of these civilizations or all of it, and we need to make sure we have the context defined correctly so that we
That's
can
great.
move forward.
What this is coming down to is that I do believe that Sumer in the area of Iraq is where civilization began, but it's not when we told it. It's not when we're told it began. I believe that civilizations there are much, much older than even Younger Dryas Ice Age. I believe they may be as old as 50,000 years old.
What makes you think that?
What we're about to go over with evidence showing the different iterations of those civilizations, which proves that they're from these different time periods. And I just want to give one example.
Sure.
There's an ancient tablet called the Legend of Etana. And Etana, E-T-A-N-A, Etana was an ancient king of one of these cities called Kish. What's fascinating, though, is in that tablet, it opens up by discussing how there was a great catastrophe on the earth, and that basically all of civilization was destroyed, and that it had to be relowered again. Kingship had to be relowered again, like civilization to be recreated in this new world at Kish. Kish is part of this Sumerian region of Iraq. So it's telling you right there, look, we had these ancient cities that were created here. A catastrophe came through, destroyed them, and then another civilization emerged after. And that's a core concept that I want to be echoed through this entire conversation. I want to mention that again. Because in Sumer, you find out that there are what these call great sages.
And I'm going to put a picture in the corner of the screen for people to follow this, by the way.
Throughout the ancient world, especially Sumer, we find this overlapping theme everywhere. It's shown in literally depictions of rock reliefs, in ancient texts, everywhere, of this idea of a great, powerful being, like a very, very smart, beyond anyone around them, who travels with a group around the world and creates civilizations. It's shown literally throughout countless texts. What connects this to the Dogon that's so strange is that the Dogon state that there was a being known as connected to Awanas in Sumer the same depiction, same everything, that is the one that told them everything, is the one that where they got all the knowledge from.
There's got it. Okay.
So it's these ancient sage from Sumer made it to Mali, Africa. But is that the only place they made it to? No. That's only one of many, many, many.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.